bless them. So let's open with a word of prayer, and then Mark, I'm going to hand over to you. So let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for the privilege for us to be gathered here again today for the Peace Online program with Mark Langston, as he'll be going over studies in the book of Daniel chapter 11, powerful chapter, Lord. We're grateful to go through this together. I pray that as we go over it, that we'll experience those true principles of prophecy, in that what you said of in John chapter 14, verse 29, that you tell us things before they take place, so that when we see it happen, we will believe. We'll believe in you. So I pray everybody who's here will have a deeper relationship with you by way of the presentations today. This is my prayer. In Jesus' precious name, we say amen. Amen. All right, Mark, so I hand over to you, and God bless.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you for your prayer. Okay, I'll say good day to everyone, because not everyone is going to be in the same. Not everyone is in the same time zone as me, so good day to everyone. Happy to join. This is part 3. Part 1, we looked at the importance of understanding Daniel 11. We looked at how Daniel 11 is a prophecy like no other. It's a prophecy that culminates with a time of trouble such as never was. So it's a time prophecy such as never was. We've got 4 lines of prophecy in Daniel. We've got Daniel 2, 7, 8 coupled with 9, and then 11, going into 12. And each of the 4 lines is, well, you've got Daniel 2 and 7 is an amplification of 2. 8 is an amplification of 7, which is an amplification of 2. And what you see in each line, which covers the same history, Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, Rome phase 1 and Rome phase 2, is a little more detail added each time. And what we're going to see in Daniel 11 is the most detail of all of the lines of prophecy is Daniel 11. And what's important about Daniel 11 is because it gives the most detail where the last days are concerned. And we're going to call the last days, for the most part, post 1798. Daniel 2 highlights the fact that God is going to set up an everlasting kingdom. Daniel 7 highlights the fact that God's going to set up an everlasting kingdom, but before then he's going to judge. There's going to be a judgment period that's relational to books. Daniel 8 highlights the fact that the judgment is connected to the cleansing of the sanctuary. And we get like a time frame when we couple 9 with 8. And so we arrive in 1844, and we can locate the beginning of the judgment era and so on and so forth. Daniel 11, from verses 40 to 45, gives a lot of information regarding the end time and how the end times will affect God's people. This is why it's so important to understand the 11th of Daniel. Remember the idea that we looked at, that the word of God is a field. Now imagine a portion of the field that's labeled prophecy. A lot of digging has been done in chapters 2, 7, 8, and 9, especially 2 and 7. A lot of people kind of wrestle a bit with 8, certain portions of it. A lot of people struggle with 9 and 70 weeks and so on and so forth. 2 has been dug thoroughly. 7 has been dug thoroughly. 8 and 9 have been dug into quite a lot. But the portion of the field labeled prophecy, where no one's really dug into a lot, is the Daniel 11 portion of the field. And in every portion of the field, treasure is to be found. And so it's important that we dig into 11, because there's treasure in 11 that will help us specifically for this time. And ultimately, the treasure is Jesus. So there are things about Jesus, things about the science of salvation that we're gonna draw from 11 that are vital for this time. Now, bear in mind the importance of seeing Jesus in whatever we study, and seeing Jesus. It isn't always that you see him as a person. You may see glimpses of what he does. You may see insight into his love. And one of the most important verses in the whole of the book of Daniel 11 is verse 1. Just give me a second. Let me just grab a little bit of water here. Daniel 11 and verse 1 is often skipped over. It refers to what Gabriel says, and where Darius is concerned. Gabriel says that he strengthened and confirmed Darius. Now, the strengthening of Darius we read about in Daniel chapter 6. I'm not going to go into that for time's sake because we've got a lot to go through today. The reason I'm emphasizing this is that because in Daniel 11, you've got kings of the north and south. They're north and south in relation to Jerusalem. So when the north attacks the south, they pass by the center of truth, that's Jerusalem, where the sanctuary is located. Remember, Psalm 77 and verse 13, thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. So every time a king of the north passes by or goes down to the king of the south, they're passing by the truth. They're passing by the truth. So they're being exposed to the truth. Every time a king of the south goes up to the king of the north, they're passing by the truth. So these kings of the north and south are being exposed to the truth as they interact with each other. And God's desire for each king of the north and south is the same as his desire for Darius, is the same as his desire for Nebuchadnezzar and every other king. He wants to save people. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And the sanctuary is a revelation of Jesus' son. So as these kings of the north and south fight against each other, they're passing by the truth, and the Lord is looking to impress upon their hearts the need of salvation. He's looking to change their hearts. He's looking to do for them what he did for Darius. So God wants to save every king of the north and south. What we see also in the 11th of Daniel is this wrestling between the kings of the north and south that kind of depicts the fight that goes on inside of us. We can be double-minded. Remember, the Laodicean is neither hot nor cold. So there's this internal battle that can go on in our hearts and minds. And what we need to do is focus on the truth, as the kings of the north and south should have focused on truth. That's what we need to do. We need to take our eyes off of the struggle and focus on Jesus, that he might help us through the struggle. Bearing in mind Philippians 4 and verse 13, which says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So bear in mind as we go through chapter 11 that the wrestling that's described is a little insight into the struggle that we go through as people. Even the disciples were struggling in a similar way to the kings of the north and south, in the sense that they were arguing over who was the greatest. The battle between the kings of the north and south was to do with who was the greatest. Satan's mindset is all about being the greatest. So if we take our eyes off of Jesus, we can become like the kings of the north and south, externally and internally. And the Lord wants to do for us what he did for Darius, and that is strengthen and confirm us, confirm our faith, confirm our faith. So let's go into the presentation now. Bear with me. I'm going to screen share. So bear with me. What's going on there? From beginning. Okay. So there's slide 1, the title. So today we're going to be looking at, and we're going through a lot of information, a lot of slides. Part 2 was from verses 1 to 14. Part 3, you can see, is dealing with verses 15 to 31. A lot of history. So I'm asking you, Craig is going to make the notes available. There's a PowerPoint, there's a part 3 on PowerPoint, and there's a part 3 as a Word document. I'm going to skim over a lot of the quotes for time's sake. So I'm just asking you to, in your own time, read through the presentations that I've made available, because it'll just help you to lock down the history. A lot of history. Every student of prophecy should be a student of history. Now remember, in verse 14, we saw it's a transitional verse. Verse 14. Remember, verses 1 and 2 introduce us to the Persians. Toward the end of verse 2, you've got the Grecians introduced. So going from 2 to 3 is a transitional verse. So verses 1 and 2 of Daniel 11 correspond with the silver of Daniel 2 and the bear of Daniel 7, as well as the ram of Daniel 8. Verse 2 going into verse 3 of Daniel 11, we're transitioning from the silver to the brass, from Persia to Grecia. We're transitioning from the bear to the leopard-like beast in chapter 7, and we're transitioning from the ram to the he-goat. So going from the end of verse 2 into verse 3, that's a transitional verse. The next transitional verse is verse 14. We're introduced to the robbers or the breakers of thy people being Daniel's people. Now, when you look at chapter 2, you'll see the iron of the metal man image is described as something that breaks. When you look at chapter 7, the fourth beast of chapter 7, with the iron teeth breaks and so on and so forth. So the word breaks is synonymous with the fourth kingdom. This is why when we look at the robbers or the break of thy people, we can say, we're dealing with the fourth entity now, it's Rome. So verse 14 is another transitional verse. So what we see in verse 14 is the switch or the gradual, the beginning of the gradual switch from the brass to the iron of chapter 2. The beginning of the transitional switch from the leopard-like beast to the terrible or dragon-like beast of chapter 7. We're seeing a transitional switch from the he-goat or the four horns that rise up after the breaking of the notable horn on the he-goat to the little horn phase 1 of the little horn. Now, bear in mind that Rome has two phases. You've got the pagan phase and the papal phase. So we're going to have to look for another transition later on, because in chapter 2, you've got a transition from pagan to papal when the clay is introduced to the iron. The terrible beast of chapter 7, the transitional period where the terrible beast is concerned, is when the little horn comes up and plucks 3 of the 10 horns that were before it. So that's the switch from paganism to papalism in chapter 7, when a little horn emerges, getting rid of the 3 horns that were in the way of its dominance. In chapter 8, you've got this little horn that comes up after the 4. That's initially pagan Rome. And you see a horizontal pushing where pagan Rome is concerned. But that little horn switches its focus heavenward. So you've got like a pagan Rome, horizontal push. Papal Rome, a vertical push. Hope that makes sense. So verse 14 is a transitional verse. King of the North, in the context, is still Syria or Antiochus the Great. King of the South, for the most part, is still Egypt. What we see in verse 14 is Rome come into the scene, come into the picture to establish the vision. The vision can't be established without Rome, because it has to be Babylon, Medo-Persia, Grecia, Rome phase 1 and Rome phase 2. So what we see in verse 15, I'll read the verse, it says, King of the North shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. So remember this tit for tat thing that we've seen so far. King of the North will come at the king of the South. King of the South will come at the king of the North. King of the North will come at the king of the South. So there's this back and forth. There was an attempt to kind of bring the people together, the North and the South together with the marriage where Theos and Berenice and so on were concerned, and that didn't work out, and it just caused more trouble. So we see this back and forth between the kings of the North and South. The king of the North will deal with the king of the South. King of the South will come back and deal with the king of the North. And that's what it's been. It's been like this tit for tat back and forth, each side passing by the truth, God trying to save each of the kings, each of the kingdoms, but sadly they're so focused on who is the greatest that they ignore the truth. So the king of the North shall come up, cast a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the South shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. Now remember in the previous verses we saw that there's a boy king on the throne in the South, Ptolemy Epiphanes, and you've got Antiochus the Great up in the north. He's looking now to come down into Egypt because he sees Epiphanes as an easy target. That's what's happened historically. Rome have kind of thrown their hat into the ring. They're saying, we're coming on this, we're entering the fray now. Yeah, so what you see if you go through, I mean, I'm not going to read all of the quotes, but we have here John Gill's exposition of the Bible. If you've ever downloaded eSword, you can kind of add John Gill's exposition or commentary to your eSword package, and he's got some good stuff when it comes to history. So what we're seeing where Gill is concerned, he's just describing the history of what happens using Josephus's writings and so on and so forth to kind of highlight what happens in relation to Syria coming down to attack Egypt. We see a combination of Syria and Macedon. Philip, the king of Macedon, joins up with Antiochus the Great. They're coming down into Egypt. And what Rome does, Rome sends a general by the name of Scopus to basically support Epiphanes. Rome are trying to basically come in to seemingly help, but their real plan is to take over. So you've got these forces coming from the north. They're looking to come down into the south, into Egypt, to take Egypt. And Scopus is sent by the Romans to back Egypt. That's what's happening historically. And if you read through the exposition, John Gill's exposition, you'll see information where that's concerned. Uriah Smith also gives insight into what Rome did, in the sense that they send a guy by the name of Lepidus. He goes down into Egypt, and he is seeking to guide the young king, so Rome are getting involved now in this whole battle between the kings of the north and south. If you read through, all of these quotes here that you'll see on screen, a lot of information. Take time to read it. As I said, every student of prophecy must be a student of history, because remember, history for the most part is the unfolding of prophecy. History is the unfolding of prophecy. So this is the verse, and you see the red sections as with the other verses, are kind of like the adding of the names of the individuals or the players who are part of the back and forth. So the king of the north, that's Antiochus the Great, shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities. So he's attacking Egypt, and the arms or the Egyptian forces of the south will not withstand. So Antiochus is victorious. Neither his, that's Ptolemy the fifth Epiphanes, chosen people. Remember, Ptolemy Epiphanes chooses the Romans to help him. That's Scopus and his Italian forces. Neither shall there be any strength to withstand. So what we see in verse 15 is, from the north, Antiochus the Great with Robert of Macedon, they're coming down from Syria to attack Egypt. The Romans have sent forces to help to defend Egypt, but the combined forces of Egypt and Rome, at this point in time, they're defeated. And so at this point in time, the king of the north is Syria, or the kingdom of the north is Syria, the king of the north is Antiochus the Great, and they've inflicted a blow upon Egypt, or the king of the south, as well as Rome. Now remember that the back and forth tit for tat methodology or mindset that we see a pattern of when we go through Daniel 11. So what you'd expect is for some comeback in relation to the south and north. So we're going to bear in mind that what we see in this verse is that Antiochus the Great, or Syria, has dealt a blow to ultimately Rome, because the Egyptians at this point in time, or Egypt at this point in time, is very weak. It's very weak. And so they're not the powerhouse that they once were. And so it's like Rome has come onto the scene, and now Rome it's almost like Rome are going to take over when it comes to the back and forth between kings of the north and kings of the south, because Rome has entered into Egypt at this point. Rome are trying to kind of influence Egypt. So when the king of the north at the time, Antiochus the Great, comes down to attack Egypt, because Rome has an interest in Egypt now, they're ultimately attacking Rome. So the tit for tat will kind of switch, in the sense that Syria have dealt a blow to Egypt, but ultimately Rome. So the comeback is going to be more of a Roman comeback than an Egyptian comeback. This is what we see in verse 16. We see in verse 16, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will. Now, when we see this shall do according to his own will, we think of verse 3, when Grecia, under the leadership of Alexander the Great, attacks Persia, and Alexander is able to do according to his own will. So verse 16 kind of highlights the fact that someone is coming, and they're going to do according to their own will. And it goes on to say, none shall stand before him. So what we'll see historically is, after a time, Rome having suffered defeat at the hands of Syria or Antiochus the Great, Rome comes back to attack Syria, and Syria isn't able to stand before him. And then it goes on to say that we're going to see that it's Rome, shall stand in the glorious land being the promised land, which by his hand shall be consumed. And so what we see in here is that Rome is eventually going to deal with Syria and also take control of the promised land. Now, you'll see on screen Uriah Smith's writings, pages 245 and 246, depending on the version of the book that you have, because sometimes page numbers are different. you're given some insight here into what actually happens. We're around the year 65 BC. On the throne in the north is Antiochus Asiaticus. Antiochus the Great has long since died. He's died about probably 40 or 50 years prior. Rome has basically Rome has developed in might and power, and they're in a position now to push back at Syria. Syria having kind of humiliated them when they went down to back Egypt. Rome didn't forget that, so they're coming back now. And in 65 BC, Pompey, famous Roman general, reduces Syria to a Roman province. So Syria are basically subjugated by the Romans, and they become a Roman province. That's what happens in 65 BC. In 63 BC, the Romans enter into Judea, and they're able to take control of the promised land. They're able to take control of the glorious land. Now, this has something to do with chapter 8, as we'll see, where Rome pushes toward the east and toward the south and toward the pleasant land. The pushing toward the east of Rome, is where Syria is located. South, we'll see, is where Egypt is located in relation to where Rome is. And the promised land, or the Holy Land, or the glorious land is what we would now call Palestine. Uriah Smith gives more information regarding what Pompey does. And you'll see a lot of information regarding some back and forth that was going on in Jerusalem between two opposing powers, one led by Hyrcanus, the other by Aristobulus. And you've got like Aristobulus making a deal with Pompey. He goes back on the deal. Hyrcanus kind of connects himself to Pompey, and he opens the city gates, and Pompey goes on to destroy Aristobulus and all of his forces. And he places Hyrcanus on the throne as like a puppet king. And later on in the time of Jesus, Herod is that puppet king. So in 63 BC, Rome kind of subjugates the Holy Land, or Israel, Judea, having subjugated Syria in 65 BC. So that's what it means when it talks about in the verse. If you see, look, the verse talking about, we'll go when the red parts of the verse appear, it will be more easy to explain or to see. So here we see verse 16 with its historical, I suppose you could say, information added. But he, pagan Rome, shall come against him, the king of the north at the time, Antiochus Asiaticus, shall do according to his will. His own will is a reference to pagan Rome going into Syria and subjugating them. And none shall stand before him, or in other words, he conquers Syria, makes Syria a province in 65 BC. And he, pagan Rome, and you could put Pompey's name there, shall stand in the glorious land, or to take control of Palestine or Canaan or Judea. That's what happens in 63 BC. And you can read the history in the previous quotes regarding the Aristobulus and Hyrcanus back and forth that Rome took advantage of, which by that is pagan Rome's hand shall be consumed. Now, I'm putting 70 AD there because Rome eventually kind of mashes down, Rome mashes down Jerusalem in 70 AD, destroying the temple, and there's like a mass dispersion of the Jews at that point in time. So they really do consume the glorious land, sadly. Some corresponding verses, as I mentioned earlier. Then I should know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all others, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were iron and his nails brass, which devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue of his feet. So we can see that Rome consumes. We see a reference to the fourth beast in Revelation, or rather Daniel 7 verse 19, consuming and stamping and so on and so forth. I remember the verse that I mentioned a little while ago, the little horn in its first phase, wax exceedingly great toward the south, that's Egypt, but we've not seen in Daniel 11 any reference to Rome pushing towards Egypt yet. We'll see that. Toward the east, that would be towards Syria. So toward the east is 65 BC when Syria is reduced to a Roman province, and toward the pleasant land, that would be 63 BC when Judea is subjugated and made a province of Rome. And they put in place like puppet kings. And as I said, in the time of Jesus, one of the puppet kings was Herod. They were tetrarchs. They were Roman-controlled kings. The real controller of Palestine or Judea would have been the Pilate, for example, in the time of Jesus would have been the real controller, not the puppet king Herod. So here you have a graphic of what was happening according to the verse that we've just looked at. You've got Rome based, in Europe, as we know. Syria's conquered in 65 BC. Judea is subdued in 63 BC, and you've got like a stone head there of a bust, I think they're called, of Pompey. He lives from 106 BC and dies in 48 BC, so some 15 years after he subdues Jerusalem, he dies. And we see Egypt of the kingdoms, once ruled over by Alexander. Only Egypt or the south is yet to be subdued by the Roman Empire. Yeah, they help Epiphanes prior to the verse that we're looking at, but they have yet to subjugate or take control of Egypt. So they've taken control of the north, or Syria. So what we have to accept now is that Rome is now the king of the north. Pagan Rome is now the king of the north, having taken Syria out of the way, having pushed Syria out of the way. Syria was the base of the king of the north for the longest time. But in 65 BC, Rome takes control of Syria. So this verse is like the culmination of the transition. Now Rome is in control, but not completely. So it's not quite the culmination, because Rome has to take control of the kingdom of the south. Rome has to take control of the kingdom of the south, which results in Rome controlling the region which was once controlled by Alexander, And this is kind of a little insight into what happens. This graphic in 63 BC, you've got Aristobulus, who was a priest king from 67 to 63 BC. He made a deal with Pompey, and that Pompey, he would let Pompey into the city, and Pompey and Aristobulus would work together to get rid of Hyrcanus. But Aristobulus, he double crosses Pompey. Pompey isn't happy. So Hyrcanus lets Pompey into the city, and Pompey goes about to, he kills Aristobulus and his forces. And then from 63 to 40 BC, Hyrcanus II is the priest king, but he's not really in control because he's given up, control really to the Romans. And that's 63 BC. Now we see in verse 17, we read in verse 17. That would be verse 17. Every now and again, you'll see me looking to my right. I've got some notes on my phone that I'm looking at. It says, he shall also set his face to enter with strength his whole kingdom, and the upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but he shall not stand on his side. She shall not stand on his side, neither before him. So I'll read that again. He, remember, the king of the north now is Rome. So that he in this context is Rome. He in this context is Rome. He shall also set his face to enter the strength of his whole kingdom, and the upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither before him. Now, what this basically is saying is that Rome is now looking to take control of the entirety of the once united but now splintered kingdom that was controlled by the Babylonians, the Persians, and then the Grecians. But remember, it was split up 20 years after Alexander's death. So what Rome is seeking to do is take the last portion of the kingdom, which would be the southern portion, or Egypt. So that's what we're looking to find. This is that which the verse is saying. So Rome is going to be doing something in relation to a woman and corruption. And this woman, whoever the woman is, she won't stand on the side of whoever the Roman is who goes down into Egypt to try and take control of the whole of the kingdom. Hope that makes sense. Now, a lot of information, again, leading upon Uriah Smith. What's going on down in the south, just after the time when Pompey or Rome take control of Palestine and the Holy Land, we see that Ptolemy Euletes, king of Egypt, dies in 51 BC, and he leaves control to his eldest son and daughter, hoping that they'll marry. That was customary in Egypt, that sons and daughters or brothers and sisters would marry to keep it in the family. His daughter, very famous lady who we know to be Cleopatra, and Cleopatra's kind of a regal name or a throne name in the sense that she was Cleopatra the Seventh. And so he, that is Ptolemy Euletes, he dies. He leaves the crown to his eldest son and daughter, that is Ptolemy and Cleopatra. Ptolemy and Cleopatra. Now, they're quarreling. That is Ptolemy and Cleopatra, they're quarreling, and a certain famous historical figure stands in or steps in. His name is Caesar, Julius Caesar. Yeah, Julius Caesar. And there's some quarrel between him and Ptolemy, and you'll see all of the information in the quotes that you'll find, or you'll see in the notes. A lot of information, a lot of historical information, back and forth between Ptolemy's involved, the brother of Cleopatra, Pompey and Caesar, and so on and so forth. And so when you go through all of these different quotes, you'll read the history of Caesar and Cleopatra, things that are going on in around 47 or so BC. The upright ones that are referred to in the text, they're the Jews who actually help Caesar when Caesar goes down into Egypt. They give him safe passage, and so they're back in the Romans at this point in time. And what we'll see later on in 11 is that there was a league made, or a kind of agreement made between the Jews and the Romans, and that was a lot to do with a guy called another Epiphanes, but not the one who was controlling Egypt. And so we'll look at that information when we get to the portion of the text that deals with it. So when you read through the notes, you'll see all of the information regarding what Julius Caesar does going down into Egypt. He actually falls for Cleopatra, and they get together. And so he, that is Caesar, falls in love with Cleopatra. And basically, some movies were made about it, and you can read about it. Julius Caesar and Cleopatra's affair, they get together, and it has an effect upon Caesar. He goes down to Egypt, he stays there, and doesn't really do what he was meant to do. So the red part of the verse now, he, that is Rome, Julius Caesar, shall also set his face to enter with the strength of the whole kingdom. So he's looking to subjugate Egypt, the last province of Alexander's kingdom, yet to be completely overcome by Rome. The upright ones are the Jews with him, and all of the information you can see in the red there, you'll see in the quotes that I've shared in the slideshow, which are also on the Word document. Thus shall he, that is Rome or Caesar, do, and he, now I put a question mark by Egypt there because, as I said earlier in one of the presentations, I can't say that I've mastered every portion of every text. So some of it's open to interpretation. And if you could look into the history, you may well yourself be able to remove the question mark from Egypt there. But I'm suggesting it's Egypt, but I put a question mark there because I can't see any other, but, have a look at it and see what you think. Shall give him, Caesar, the daughter of women. So what we see there is that Egypt has a queen, Cleopatra the Seventh, and she connects herself to Julius Caesar, and that's what's referred to when it says, shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her. So it results in something that ain't right. But she, Cleopatra, shall not stand on that is Caesar's side, neither before him. Eventually, we see that Caesar, she puts away Caesar to a certain degree and connects herself to Mark Antony. But that we'll explore later on in the prophecy. So verse 17 is kind of giving insight into what happens where Julius Caesar and Cleopatra the Seventh are concerned. Caesar goes down into Egypt to sort things out, but ends up falling for Cleopatra. I believe they have a child. There's some back and forth. Caesar helps Cleopatra to set herself up as the sole queen there, because remember, Euletes, her father, what his intention was for her to co-reign with her brother Ptolemy. They were to marry and reign together, but Cleopatra didn't want that, so she connected herself to Caesar that she might get the throne herself. But she's not going to stay with Caesar. It's not her intention. She's looking to use him, or she uses him to basically get what she wants. And so what we see here in around 47 BC, you've got Gaius Julius Caesar in the north and Cleopatra the seventh, Philopator, in the south. So she's controlling Egypt. He, that is Caesar, Julius Caesar, is controlling Rome. So king of the north, Caesar. You could say queen of the south here is Cleopatra. And verses 18 and 19, after this shall he, that is Caesar, turn his face unto the isles and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. Verse 19, then he shall turn his face towards his fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Now, what we're seeing in these verses is some insight into basically the death of Caesar. But before he's killed, as described in verse 19, and alluded to in verse 18, he, on his way from Egypt, going back up into Rome, he goes about conquering this and conquering that. And this is where we get, I don't know if you're aware of the famous phrase, Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. This is when leaving Egypt, Caesar passes along the coast of Palestine and Asia Minor and receives submission of all peoples, reading from Stephen Haskell's Story of the Daniel the Prophet. And that's when he gives his same famous dispatch, sends it to Rome, saying, I came, I saw, I conquered. He returned to Rome, where he altered laws, strengthened the Senate, settled disturbances in the army, and later brought Western Africa, which had revolted, into submission. So Julius Caesar did a lot. What we see, though, is on his return to Rome, one of his supposed friends, that is Brutus, conspires to get rid of him because Caesar's getting too powerful. Look at the history in these quotes and you'll see that because of what Caesar was looking to do, Brutus saw it fit to kill him, but Brutus didn't want to take control he thought it was a reproach for Caesar to do what he was doing. Let's look at the verse with the red part in it. After this shall he, that is Julius Caesar, turn his face unto the isles. This is where he did the Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, and shall take many. But a prince, that is Brutus, or a main man in Rome, Brutus, that is Brutus's own behalf, shall cause the reproach. That he thought that Caesar's decision to be crowned king, he saw it as an insult to the republic. He didn't want it to be an empire, he wanted it to be a So Brutus thinks it's a good idea to get rid of Caesar for the sake of Rome, and so the reproach offered by him, that is Caesar the seat, without his own reproach, meaning that he didn't want to take Caesar's position. He thought it was good to get rid of Caesar for the sake of Rome. Brutus didn't want to be king, and he shall cause it the reproach or desire to be king, the turn upon him, that is Caesar. So he's basically saying that Caesar deserves to die because he wants to be king. He wants to change up things, and that's not good in Bruce's eyes. So he had a number of conspirators. They basically kill Caesar in 44 BC. 44 BC. And again, story of Daniel the Prophet, S.N. Haskell, you can see on pages 133 going into 134, the history where Caesar's death is concerned. Daniel the Revelation, Uriah Smith talks about the same event. So when we look at verse 19 with the red kind of showing you what happened historically, then he, Julius Caesar, shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, Rome. But he, Julius Caesar, shall stumble and fall, be killed by Brutus and his fellow conspirators, and not be found. So verse 19 takes us to verse 19. Historically, we're in 44 BC, the death of Julius Caesar. Hoping that what I'm sharing is clear. And it will be a lot clearer when you read through the notes as I'm showing you on screen. A lot of information there from a number of different books. Then we go into verse 20 and it gets exciting here, because what we can do here is plug the Gospels into the narrative. Because everything that's happened from verses 3 through to 19 is between the time when Malachi wrote and the Gospels were written. So there was no prophet on the ground. So the history from verses 3 to 19 it's like what happens where Grecia is concerned in the beginning of the Roman Empire, the formalization of the Roman Empire, in the sense that it takes control of the area where God's people dwell. Verses 3 to 19, it's almost like the history of Grecia and the beginning of Rome as it relates to the interaction with God's people. before it even happened. It's like the prophet Daniel was given, or Gabriel gave the prophet Daniel insight into history that there wasn't a prophet to record in real time, if that makes sense. What we see in verse 20, though, is something very, very, very important. I like this verse. It says, then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. So remember, every time we see the reference to a standing up, that's a new king. Now, the last king, remember, Brutus, who killed Caesar, didn't want to be king. So we see the new king standing up. And this king that stands up in Rome is described as a raiser of taxes, a raiser of taxes. And it refers to him being destroyed or dying, neither in anger nor in battle. Neither in anger nor in battle. Now, again, some history regarding Rome, and what we see is a compatriot, if you will, of Caesar was a guy called Octavius. Now, he eventually was called Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus. Now, what these quotes that you'll see on screen highlight is the history of Octavius, who eventually becomes Caesar Augustus, and what he does. How he takes control and basically sets himself up as the Emperor of Rome, changing his name from Octavius to Caesar Augustus. So in your own time, read through all of the quotes that I'm sharing with you. There's quite a lot of information. Read through it. Again, I'll keep saying it. Every student of prophecy has to be a student of history. Basically, what we see in the quotes is that Augustus Caesar is the Caesar in power at the time when Jesus is born. And we'll see that God moves upon this Caesar that prophecy might be fulfilled. And we'll see it in Luke in a moment or two. But look at these prophecies, or this prophecy from the Old Testament, Micah 5 and verse 2, but thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, that is to be the ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old, from everlasting. That's a prophecy relational to the coming of Jesus and actually where he would be born, in Bethlehem of Ephratah. Galatians 4 and verse 4 reads, but when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his son, speaking retrospectively, Paul is speaking, looking back, made of a woman made under the law. And you've got another reference to the coming of Jesus in Revelation 12 and verse 5. So Micah 5 and verse 2 tells us that Jesus will be born in Bethlehem of Ephratah. Paul, speaking, retrospectively, refers to the fact that Jesus was born in the fullness of time in the right place. And then Revelation 12 and verse 5 again refers to the coming forth, or the bringing forth of the man-child, that is Jesus, which is a fulfillment ultimately of Genesis 3 and verse 15. Let's look at Luke chapter 2. Remember, the verse that we're looking at in Daniel 11 refers to a raiser of taxes, verse 20. Look at this. And now remember, the prophecy has to be fulfilled where Jesus is concerned, him being born in Bethlehem. Luke 2 and verse 1 reads, and it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Remember, the Roman emperor, or the king of the north, or the Roman leader at the time, is said to have been, in verse 20, it's prophesied that the ruler of Rome would be a raiser of taxes. And this taxing was first made by Cyrenius when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. Now remember, in 65 BC, the Romans subjugated Syria. Cyrenius was like the equivalent of Pilate in Palestine, because Syria was once a powerhouse, the kingdom of the north, but now they're just a province governed by a Roman, Cyrenius, and all went to be taxed, everyone to his own city. Verse 4, and Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth. Remember, this is where Joseph and Mary live, in Nazareth, which is in Judea. No, sorry, he goes from Nazareth to Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem. Remember Micah 5 verse 2, because he was of the house and the lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary as a spouse wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. So what we see here is parallel in verse 20 of Daniel 11. Augustus Caesar, once Gaius Octavius, he is the raiser of taxes. God moves upon this Caesar to tax the world, and the taxing involves everyone going to the city of their fathers. Just so happened that Joseph, his home city was ultimately Bethlehem. So we see here that Gaius Octavius, who eventually became Augustus Caesar, God moves upon him, he raises taxes or puts taxes in place that result in Jesus being born in Bethlehem of Ephratah in fulfillment of Micah 5 and verse 2 in the fullness of time. So at the right time, God moves upon Augustus Caesar for Augustus Caesar to put this tax in place that results in Joseph and Mary going to Bethlehem, that Jesus might be born there in fulfillment of the prophecy. What are the odds of that? What are the odds of that? So verse 20, then shall stand up in his, that is Julius Caesar's estate. So Julius Caesar is dead sometime after. Augustus Caesar becomes emperor, who was previously Octavius, in the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days after what seems a short period of time, due to the peace which he reigned, he, Augustus Caesar, previously Octavius, shall be destroyed. He dies, neither in anger nor in battle, but peacefully due to old age. Caesar Augustus reigns for the longest time, and there was peace in Rome during his time, for the most part. He dies in around 14 AD. He co-reigns with the next emperor from around 12 AD, but he peacefully dies in 14 AD, not in anger nor in battle. So Augustus Caesar is the raiser of taxes. So verse 20, we're around the time of Jesus. We're around the time of Jesus. Verse 21, and in his estate, that is Augustus Caesar's estate, shall stand up a vile person to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. What we see in verse 1 of chapter 3 of Luke is the name of the next king. Remember, we've got Caesar Augustus in chapter 2. The next king is referred to in Luke chapter 3 and verse 1, and we know him as Tiberius Caesar. And we see that Pontius Pilate is now the governor in Judea. This is the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius. So Augustus Caesar is the one who raises taxes, resulted in Jesus being born in Bethlehem. The 15th year of the reign of Tiberius, there's some dispute over it. Some say the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar is 29 AD. Forgetting that, or not counting the fact that Tiberius Caesar actually co-reigns with Augustus Caesar from 12 AD. Significant because the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius is 27 AD, and this is when John the Baptist begins his work and Jesus is baptized and so on and so forth. So it's a very significant year. So what we see in verses 20 and 21 of Daniel 11 is the time of Jesus with two Caesars who stand up. The first being Augustus, who makes it so that Jesus is born in Bethlehem, and Tiberius Caesar, he's the one who puts Pilate in control and so on and so forth. So very significant Caesars. And what you'll see here is a lot of information regarding Tiberius Caesar and why he's called a vile person and why it says that he enters peaceably in the verse 21. So take your time to read through these quotes and you'll see great insight into the attitude of Tiberius Caesar and why he's called a vile person. We see one quote here from Seneca. Seneca remarks of Tiberius that he was never intoxicated but once in his life. He continued in a state of perpetual intoxication from the time he gave himself to drinking to the last moment of his life. Tyranny, hypocrisy, debauchery, and uninterpreted intoxication, if these traits and practices show a man to be vile, Tiberius exhibited that character in disgusting perfection. So that's just what was said of Tiberius, a very vile individual who reigned from 14 AD, but officially from 12 AD to 37 AD. So verse 21, in his, that is Caesar Augustus' estate, after Caesar Augustus' death, shall stand up a vile person, that is Tiberius Caesar, to whom they, those under his rule, shall not give the honor of the kingdom. No one liked Tiberius Caesar, but he, Tiberius Caesar, shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. He kind of used his head on Caesar Augustus. I think he was his son-in-law, if I remember the previous quotes, but read them through, if I remember them correctly. And we'll see a lot of flatteries going on where Rome is concerned, especially when it comes to the papal phase. Let's go to verse 22, which reads, "And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant." And we have to ask, who is the prince of the covenant? Who is this prince of the covenant that's referred to? We'll explore that when looking at this verse. Just going down my notes here. Just bear with me. Hope everyone is following. I'm giving a lot of information, talking a lot of stuff I'm going through. But as I said, the notes that you've got on the presentations will help you a great deal to fill any gaps that I might have left. So again, story of Daniel the prophet. This is a book that I've lent on heavily. If you can get this book, you can see the title there. You'll see the title of it on your presentations. I'm recommending that you get it, even if you just get it in PDF form. It's a really excellent book. And if you get any of other of Stephen Haskell's books, I recommend them all. So he's going to give a little information into what happens to Tiberius and how this verse relates to the crucifixion of Jesus, the Prince of the Covenant. Uriah Smith gives a lot of info regarding the verse. And when you look at the quotes, you'll see that Tiberius, he dies sometime after the death of Jesus, but you'll better understand what it means when it says, "With the arms of a flood, they shall be overflown from before him." And the demise of Tiberius Caesar is kind of summed up well in those particular words that are used in verse 22. "And he shall be broken." That refers to the death of Tiberius Caesar. "Yea, also the prince of the covenant." So we see in verse 20 a reference to Augustus Caesar. So verse 20, we're around the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. In verse 22, we're at the death of Jesus in Jerusalem on Calvary. So verse 20, birth of Jesus. Verse 22, the death of Jesus. And you've got two significant emperors. Verse 21, Augustus Caesar verse 20, Augustus Caesar verses 21 and 22, Tiberius Caesar. Again, if you read through the quotes that I've shared, you'll see a lot of information that will help you to better understand the content of those particular verses. And what we've got here is just a thing that I think you might find, whoops, what have I done? Interesting. These are all of the prophecies that you find in the book of Daniel. And you can see here, well, I wish I could point to it, but the first portion of this timeline, if you will, you've got the 70 weeks. Now, the verses in Daniel from chapter, well, I would say from verse 2 to verse 22 cover the 70 weeks period. You have, I would say, 3 emperors between that period, or in that period, who control Rome. You've got Caesar, Julius Caesar, you've got Augustus Caesar, no, 4 emperors, sorry. You've got Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, you've got, it's 3. Let me get it right, it's 3. You've got Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, and Tiberius. And the period that you're looking at is the 70 weeks period. You've got the birth of Jesus, and then you've got 31 AD, the death of Jesus, and a little while after that is the death of Tiberius. So when you look at this can be useful, I believe, when you're looking at Daniel as a whole, because you can see there was a 70 weeks prophecy, a 2,300 days prophecy, 1,335 days prophecy, or years prophecy, the 1290 to the 1260. And then you've got a prophecy that we'll find and look at in verse 24 of Daniel 11, 360 days or 360 years prophecy. We'll explore that shortly. So what we're looking at as a summary, verses 14 to 22 deal with Roman history, deals with over 200 years of political history of Rome, 202 BC to the death of Tiberius in 37 AD, culminating with the crucifixion of our Lord, for the most part, because obviously 31, when Jesus died, is a little bit before 37 AD, when Tiberius dies. We are taken down through the ages to the midst of the week, 31 AD, the last week of the 70 weeks, or the 490 years prophecy of Daniel 9. There are events connected to the reign of three emperors, Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, and Tiberius Caesar. It's also important to note that verses 1 to 22 as a whole focus on the experiences of individual kings and rulers from Cyrus to Tiberius. From verse 23, we'll see an added emphasis on the experience of nations, peoples, tongues, etc. We are to look for special emphasis placed upon the experience of God's people, because not a lot has been said about God's people yet. Little bits and pieces here and there. And bear in mind what verse 14 says of Daniel chapter 10. Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people, God's people, Daniel's people, in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. So what we're going to see from verse 23 onwards is more of a focus on how Rome interacts with, whether in its pagan or papal phase, the people of God. What we've seen from verses 14 to 22 where Rome is concerned, things to do with the 70 weeks or 490 years prophecy. And remember, Daniel is seeking to better understand ultimately the 2,300 days or years prophecy of chapter 8, verses 14 and 26, of which the 70 weeks are a part. So what we're seeing from verses 14 to 22 is a bit of a backdrop when it comes to the goings on that are connected to the 70 weeks of the coming of Jesus. We see insight into the emperor that made it possible for him to be born in Bethlehem, the raiser of taxes. We see the emperor that's like the controller of Pontius Pilate, that kind of, he controls things around the time when Jesus was crucified. So it's a little backdrop regarding the 70 weeks where the history of Rome is concerned as it relates to God's people. So what we're going to look for after verse 22 are things to do with a number of things. Things to do with God's people, the Jews, and eventually the Christians. As well as, remember, what we have seen so far is that Rome has conquered Syria, the king of the north, or the kingdom of the north. Rome has also taken control of the glorious land, the promised land, the Holy Land, or Palestine, Judea. Rome has had interaction with Egypt, but what we've not seen yet is the subjugation of Egypt. So that's a major thing to consider, the fact that we haven't seen the subjugation of Egypt yet. So what we're going to do prophetically, what the prophecy does, it kind of steps back in time to fill some gaps, One of the major gaps that's left to fill is the subjugation of Egypt. How does that come about? Now, we see there in verse 23, we'll see the rendition of it in the King James. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. Now, this verse is a tricky one. A lot of people struggle with this verse. I'm going to read it in the LITV. And after they join themselves to him, he will practice deceit, for he shall come and shall be strong with a few people. So we've got Daniel and Revelation, Uriah Smith's take on this verse. We've got Josiah Litch. We've introduced a new writer here, one of the pioneers. And he emphasizes what I was trying to show earlier, the fact that there's a switch now and there's a lot of emphasis to be placed on what shall befall that. So it's like a build-up to verses 40 to 45 as it relates to God's people and their experiences, as it relates to the prophecy, as their experiences relate to the prophecy of Daniel 11. So what these guys are saying, what they refer to is some issues. We've got William Miller, Josiah Litch, Uriah Smith. So we're drawing on the works of the pioneers. And what they're basically saying, when you read through their writings, is that there's a switch now. They talk about what I mentioned regarding the 70 weeks, and they talk about a pact that was made, or a league that was made, where the Jews and the Romans were concerned. It happened in, there are some dates, there's some dispute over when the date actually was, but what we see in history that's a coming together of kind of Rome and the Jews happened in 161 BC, where that is the Jews made a league with the Romans because of some trouble they were having with Antiochus Epiphanes. He was a Syrian king who was troubling Rome as well as the Jews. And so because of this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, the Romans and the Jews, they kind of join up to try and help each other where the Syrians were concerned. So they come together and they make a league. And they work together to a certain degree, but eventually Rome subjugates the province of Judea, or basically turns Judea into a Roman province, as we saw that happen in 63 BC. So when you look at verse 23, reading through the quotes from Josiah Litch, William Miller, and Uriah Smith, and after the league, the Jewish league, 161 BC, made with him, that is pagan Rome, he, pagan Rome, shall work deceitfully, for he, pagan Rome, shall stand up and shall become strong from a small people. In 161 BC, the Romans were a small people or a little horn. Now, some people interpret it this way, that they say that the small people is a reference to the Jews. So there are two ways of looking at this verse, and this is something that I'm still wrestling with myself. So any one of you could look into this and say, Mark, this is what it would better interpret, or this is how it would better interpret. So there's a Jewish league that's made in 161 BC between pagan Rome and Judea, or the Jews. But pagan Rome will eventually work deceitfully and look to take over, and eventually in 63 BC, the Romans subjugate Judea and make it a province. Now, the small people, at the latter end of verse 23, could be a reference to Rome being small at the time in the sense that they haven't taken control, or they're a little horn at the time. But a lot of people will say, and it's probably a good way of looking at it, that small people at the time were the Judeans, because they weren't really powerful at the time. And so I would more lean to even now suggesting that the small people in this particular verse are maybe the Jews, because at the time in 161 BC, 7 years prior, the Romans had defeated the Grecians at the Battle of Pydna. So I'm leaning even now as I'm thinking and I'm looking at it that the small people is probably a reference to the Jews, because at the time they were insignificant, having been subjugated or having been trampled by a lot of other folk. Again, the same verse, but the LITV, and after they, the Jews, join themselves to him, pagan Rome, in 161 BC. He, pagan Rome, will practice deceit. For he, pagan Rome, shall come or grow and shall be strong in strength, with a few people having once been small in number as a people, little horn, phase one. So that's what I've lent toward before, referencing the few people or the small people as maybe having a connection to the little horn. But I'm just as, I suppose you could say, comfortable interpreting or viewing the few people or the small people as the Jews, because they weren't a very strong people in 161 BC. So this is one of those verses I have to say I'm still working on locking down the interpretation, because different commentators have different views where the fulfillment of this particular prophecy is, or this portion of the prophecy is concerned. Verse 24, he shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the stronghold, even for a time. Now, I believe even for a time of this verse is a time prophecy. A time is a year. A Jewish year is 360 days. So I'm suggesting that even for a time is a period of 360 years. And it has something to do with Rome. The he in this particular context is Rome, and he enters peaceably even upon the fattest place of the province. Now, the province, I believe, has something to do with the area that was once controlled by Alexander, that was splintered up by the four kings in fulfillment of earlier portions of Daniel 11. Eventually the kings of the north and south. Rome has already conquered the north, Syria, in 65 BC. Rome has taken control of the promised land in 63 BC. The only portion of the province to be taken control of is Egypt. And when we see here the scattering among the prey, the spot, Rome conquered in a different way to the previous kingdom. Rome would often go into a nation without looking to destroy them. That is the nation, they would be offered spoil and riches. The Romans would say, we'll build you roads, aqueducts, and so on and so forth. And they were doing this thing, forecasting devices against strongholds, taking them in different ways. Even for a time, or there's a 360-year period connected to Rome forecasting devices against strongholds. Now, any time there's a prophecy introduced, we have to accept that a starting point has to be given, that we might put the prophecy in its rightful place in time. Now, we see here Josiah Litch talking about the fulfillment of this particular verse, and he talks about how Rome would basically share the wealth with those who it wanted to be a part of its kingdom, to pay tribute and so on and so forth. Read through these quotes and you'll see that they talk about the way that Rome would do things. And Uriah Smith, in the third paragraph on screen, you'll see he interprets even for a time. He says doubtless a prophetic time of 360 years. But then he says, from what point are these years to be dated? Now he suggests probably from the event brought to view in the following verse. Now, Josiah Litch, he's saying the same thing, that there's a prophetic time referred to in verse, I agree with them, in verse 24. And in order for us to mark the beginning of that time period, we need to look for something in the context that's going to help us to understand. And it's going to be the next verse, as we'll see. So verse 24, he, pagan Rome, shall enter peaceably without war, even upon the fattest places of the province. And he, pagan Rome, shall do that which the fathers' previous kingdoms have not done, nor his fathers' going back through the ages. He, pagan Rome, shall scatter among them those under their rule, the prey, the spoil, and the riches. Yea, he, pagan Rome, that's a reference to the prey, the spoil, and the riches. Rome doesn't mind sharing the wealth. And pagan Rome shall forecast from the city of Rome his pagan Rome's devices against the strongholds of either kingdoms, other kingdoms, even for a time. I'm going to skip that one. So we've got this, even for a time, this 360-year period. Where do we put that in time? And it has something to do with the city of Rome. It has something to do with the city of Rome and what the Romans would do from that city, even for a time of 360 years. Now, I believe that the marker for the beginning of the 360 years is found in verse 25, because whenever a prophecy is given, there's going to be given, as well as the prophecy, some insight into when to start the prophecy. And what we see in verse 25 is a reference to a great battle, great and mighty armies. Now, when you look at what Uriah Smith says, and you read through his commentary, you'll see that such a battle took place between Mark Antony and Augustus Caesar. Now, bear in mind that Egypt has yet to be subjugated. You've got Cleopatra VII down in Egypt, who was kind of placed on the throne, or helped to gain the throne by Julius Caesar, but then Julius Caesar died. Cleopatra gets into a relationship with Mark Antony. He goes down to Egypt, that is Mark Antony. Augustus Caesar is up in the north. And so you've got this combination of Antony and Cleopatra down in the south, and you've got Augustus Caesar up in the north, and they're going to have a battle. Read through the commentaries, you'll see the battle took place in 31 BC, and it was called the Battle of Actium. So we've got this 360 years prophecy referred to in verse 24. Then we've got a marker relational to the beginning of the time period, which is a battle. The battle took place in 31 BC. So in the north, you've got Caesar Augustus. In the south, you've got Cleopatra VII, Philopator, with Marcus Antonius, otherwise known as Mark Antony. And so when you look at verse 25, and he, Octavius, soon to be Caesar Augustus, shall stir up his, CA is Caesar Augustus, yeah? Parent, his, Caesar Augustus, his courage against the king of the south. Now there's a combination of Antony and Cleopatra, A and C, with a great army, and the king of the south, A and C, shall be stirred up to battle. That's the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, with a very great army. But he, or Antony and Cleopatra, shall not stand. They lose the Battle of Actium, and they, Antony's own forces, shall forecast devices against him, shall declare allegiance to Octavius, because what basically happens, there's a great naval battle, and you've got, it looks as though Antony and Cleopatra have the upper hand, but Cleopatra gets a little afraid, and she, royal barge, a ship, she sails away. She doesn't want to get involved in the battle. Mark Antony goes after her, and his forces, they declare allegiance, because Mark Antony, he kind of leaves them to chase after Cleopatra, and they don't rate that, so they align themselves with Octavius or Caesar Augustus, and Mark Antony takes his own life, as does Cleopatra. So what we have is a starting point for the 360 years prophecy, the Battle of Actium, when Rome unified under Octavius or Augustus Caesar. Basically, in 31 BC, Egypt becomes a province of Rome. So in 31 BC, Rome has finally taken control of the entirety of the kingdom. They took Syria in 65 BC. They've taken the Promised Land, or the Judea, in 63 BC. By 31 BC, Rome controls all of it. So Rome's in control now. and they're able to forecast devices for a period of time, and the prophecy relational to the period of time during which time they're able to forecast devices is 360 years. And interestingly enough, in 330 AD, 360 years after 31 BC, Constantine relocates, he moves from Rome to Constantinople. So the throne of the Caesars moves, the throne of power moves from Rome to Constantinople, forming the Eastern Roman Empire, 360 years after the Battle of Actium. I don't think that's coincidental. Now, what we see in verses 26 and 27, they're kind of like, I don't know if I'd call them filler. This gives a little insight into what happens between Mark Antony and Octavius, soon to be called Augustus Caesar. And so they're kind of working together at first. They sit at one table, they speak lies and so on and so forth. And what you'll see in these particular commentaries, or that particular statement by Uriah Smith, is a little insight into what happens where Antony and Octavius and so on and so forth are concerned. Verse 26, when you read the quote, you'll see, "Yea, they, his allies, Cleopatra VII, shall feed at the portion of his Mark Antony." And have a look at the quote, you'll see that this verse makes sense. "Yea, they, his allies, Cleopatra VII, that feed at the portion of his table, that's Mark Antony's meat shall destroy him, and his Mark Antony's army shall overflow defect. Many shall fall down slain." This is just a reference to what happens to Mark Antony having been betrayed or deserted by Cleopatra. And even his own men deserted him because of that. He was besotted with Cleopatra, and because of that, he lost the Battle of Actium. And Antony and Octavius were once an alliance, and they sat at the one table, but they had issues with each other. And so they're sitting at the one table, and deceit and so on and so forth refers to the fact that Antony and Octavius were once friends, or supposedly, and these kings, Antony and Augustus, heart shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, pose as friends, but purpose in their hearts to destroy each other. But it shall not prosper for Antony, but yet the end shall be at the time appointed. So there's an end to their relationship, and that's when Augustus Caesar defeats Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. So what we see in 31 BC, as you can see on screen, you've got Caesar Augustus at the center. They now control everywhere. Rome is now dominant, and they control everywhere. And it talks in verse 28, "And he shall return into his land, and with great riches, and his heart shall be against the Holy Covenant, and he shall do exploits, and shall return to his own land." So Rome now controls everywhere. And now there's a focus on Rome being against the Holy Covenant. That's referred to in verse 28. So what we're going to see now is a switch where Rome controls everywhere. Now remember, Satan loves to use kingdoms to attack God's people. Now beasts are used to symbolize kingdoms, symbolically in the book of Daniel chapter 7. Remember, the first time that Satan attacks God's people, you could say Eve, he uses a literal beast. And so what we're going to see is Rome is going to be used just as the serpent was used to attack the truth and basically the Holy Covenant, things about Jesus and the truth and the law and the scripture and so on and so forth. Satan's going to sadly use, Rome is going to sadly allow itself, should I say, to be used by the devil. And you'll see here references to what Rome begins to do. And in your own time, read through these quotes, and you'll see that it all culminates with the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And you'll see in this particular slide, in the red, what's going on in fulfillment of the verse. Then he, pagan Rome under Octavius, shall return. So pagan Rome subjugates the entirety of Alexander's former kingdom. But then pagan Rome eventually, starts to attack God's people, and it's initially the Jews, but it will eventually transition from the Jews to the Christians. So if you read the red in your own time, you'll see what that verse is actually speaking about historically. Now, when we see verses 29 to 31, I'll read it. It says, "And at the time appointed shall he return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. An arm shall stand in his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Now, there's a lot in these particular verses. So what we see in verse 29 is, remember, it's always this tit for tat between the king of the north and the south. So something's going to happen in relation to the south as it relates to Rome, and it's not going to be as it was before. Bear in mind that when Rome attacks the south initially, Battle of Actium, Rome is victorious, but this interaction with whoever's coming from the south is going to be different in the sense that Rome isn't going to win this time. Rome isn't going to win this time. And you'll see information here regarding what happens to Rome and so on and so forth, and who comes from the south. And who comes from the south. I'm not really going to go into this. Yeah, I could do this. Then he shall return into his land with great riches. So in 31 BC, this is the format. This is when the last interaction between Rome and the kingdom of the south, Rome wins. Then there's a reference to him setting his heart against the Holy Covenant and doing exploits and returning to his own land. And, you know, you've got Palestine and things relational to the Jews there. Different Bible versions help us to better understand verse 29, I believe. So when you have a chance, because time is going and I want to fit in the rest of the presentation before it finishes in the next couple of minutes, have a look at these different, because one thing I'll say, what helps a great deal when you're going through Daniel 11 is to look at different Bible versions. Sometimes the King James is a bit of a, it can be difficult because of the way that it's written. Some of the modern versions are very good when it comes to Daniel 11. And so this is a graphic that helps me to better understand this former and the latter at verse 29. Now, the former would be Alexander's kingdom gradually unified. Rome prevails against the south. So in 31, prior to 31 BC, Rome is going about taking control of Alexander's former kingdom. In 31 BC, Rome comes up against the kingdom of the south at the Battle of Actium and wins. You've got this 360 years of unity, referred to by the prophecy in verse 24. That comes to an end at a time appointed. That's the close of the 360-year prophecy when Constantine removes himself from Rome, relocating to Constantinople. The latter comes into play sometime after that. Now, what happens after 330 is that Rome is gradually broken up. So Rome brings things together, culminating in 31 BC. 360 years later, Constantine removes himself from Rome, and then Rome is gradually broken up. So there's a coming together, culminated in 31 BC. 360 years later, Constantine removes himself, and then there's a gradual breaking up of Rome. And there's something that's connected to Rome not prevailing against the south. So at the time appointed, when the 360-year prophecy ends, he, Rome, shall return and come toward the south, fight with its enemies, but it shall not be as the former, 31 BC, or as the latter, 330. And Rome does not prevail as it did before. Why? Verse 31 happened, or tells us what happened. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Therefore shall he be grieved and return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. So something happens where the ships of Chittim are concerned. And sometime after the reference of the ships of Chittim, there's a special focus on attacking the Holy Covenant. And there's a reference to those who have indignation against the Holy Covenant. A reference to those who have indignation against the Holy Covenant. Verse 13, the ISV refers to because the ships. So who or what are these ships of Chittim? And what does it mean when it says they that have indignation against the Holy Covenant? What's that all about? When you read through these particular quotes, you'll see that Chittim is a reference to Cyprus, and a king by the name of Genseric had a naval base on Cyprus, and he ultimately fights against the Romans coming from the south, and he, that is Genseric, the leader of the Vandals, he defeats Rome, inflicting upon them to a certain degree the beginning of the death blow. A couple of minutes and I'm finished. read through these quotes and you'll see that the ships of Chittim are kind of connected to the 7 trumpets beginning in Revelation chapter 8. The ships of Chittim are actually the 3rd trumpet of the 7 trumpet sequence. So when you look at the verse, the ships of Chittim, that's a reference to Genseric and his Vandal forces who in the 450s AD beat up the Roman armies to the extent that they're weakened, and eventually Rome disintegrates in 476 AD. And there's a return and a reference to those who are against the Holy Covenant. Now, what I'm going to have to do, because of time, is I'm going to have to stop here. And I'll quickly, next time, tomorrow, I'll quickly go through the remainder of the verses, because there aren't many left, but I don't want to rush through them. And so I'm going to stop on verse 30. And tomorrow, I'm not going to give any form of recap. I'm going to start from verse 30 because I don't want to run past this particular verse because it's very important. So I'll spend a few minutes expounding on verse 30, go into verse 31. Then we can go kind of quickly for a number of verses, and then we'll focus on verses 40 to 45. But what I've said, and I've said a lot, has been clear enough. And, I'm asking you to just refer to the notes because the notes will fill any gaps that I may have left. There's a lot of history there, and I've tried to cram in as much as I possibly could. And thank you for your time, and I'm hoping, as I've said, it makes sense. Okay, I'm wondering, Craig, are you there?
Hello.
All right, Craig.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Mark.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I was just double checking. Yeah, so thanks again for the presentation again tonight. Now, I just want to ask, did anybody have any questions that they wanted to ask Mark?
I just would like to say that it was a really wonderful study. Mark he has a wonderful way of explaining the historical and biblical aspects of this prophecy, and I really am grateful for what he has shared with us today.
Amen. Amen. Mark, my apologies. Did you have anything else that you needed to share? You're on mute. You're on mute, Mark. Sorry.
Sorry, Craig. I pressed something and I ain't no tech savvy. I've just pressed something and I don't know what I've done.
That's fine. That's fine.
My screen's gone really small. And that is nothing. I just didn't want to rush the last portion. That's all. So what I'll do, as I said, I'll basically deal with verses 30 to 45 tomorrow. So I don't want to rush through the ships of Chittim. I only need a few minutes to experiment it. But what I'll say is read through the notes are pretty detailed. And so you'll be able to work out for yourself who the ships of Chittim represent and who those who have indignation against the Holy Covenant. It's basically a reference to remember in 2 Thessalonians talks about a falling away. So those who have indignation against the Holy Covenant, that's a reference to the church having fallen away, having indignation against the Holy Covenant because they're attacking the truth. We'll see all of that next time.
All right, fantastic. So let me just bring this. Okay, thank you again, Mark. Thank you very much for the presentation. Seriously appreciated. What I'm just going to ask Mark then is if you could just close with a word of prayer, and then we'll bring the presentation to a close. Okay,
all right, let's pray. Father, at this time we pause to give you thanks for the time that we spent together. We ask that you would guide us as we continue studying, not just through Daniel 11, but through your word as a whole. You said, study to show yourselves approved unto you, workmen that need not to be ashamed. We need to rightly divide the word of truth, especially now. You say in your word, sanctify them through thy truth, thy word of truth, and thy word is truth. And sometimes it's necessary to wrestle, Father. And you've designed this chapter 11, specifically for us that we might wrestle at this time, because we need to gain strength from wrestling. So help us as we wrestle to recognize that it's necessary exercise preparatory to the time of trouble such as never was. I pray for Craig as he continues to lead out at peace. Give him knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, Father, and bless him and his family is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.